So here is our planning issue for 12.6. I've linked our plan here. This particular milestone, we have US holidays, Thanksgiving, and then at the end of the milestone, I anticipate many of us having time off also for end of the year holidays. So it might seem a little bit light, but we want to make sure that we're not overcommitting and that, you know, if we magically get everything done, then we can pull some more stuff in. All right. I'm going to walk through each one and we can talk about them as we get there. So first one, adding Sentry as a GitLab managed app. So the ability to deploy it to a Kubernetes cluster that you have connected to a GitLab project. So this is still project-based. This is not based on group level clusters, although that's an interesting thing we will consider for the future. This particular issue is just to make it easy for an individual to stand up error tracking for a single repository that they have within a GitLab project. This is also going to make it a lot easier for our internal teams to dog food this integrated workflow as part of our auto DevOps projects. So nothing crazy design related. It's going to follow the same pattern as we have for Helm or Ingress or Prometheus in the managed apps list if you click into a cluster within the operations tab in a project. Are there any questions on this one?
I know Sean has already started looking into this one, and initially Tong had brought up a potential issue, which is that the Helm chart that is widely available that is like used by the community does not support Helm upgrade, which is potentially a problem for us. But that is an ongoing conversation.
Okay.
And Sean did look into it and open an issue in GitHub for Helm around this.
What would be the worst case scenario here? We can't use the Helm chart. We have to fix the Helm chart.
Probably that we would have to fix it, and that would make this take considerably longer.
Okay. I'd love for us to identify that decision point as quickly as possible so then we can reassess the actual amount of effort against the priority of doing this.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. So as we make the list of Sentry errors in GitLab better, and we add more pertinent information to it, and we give people the ability to filter it and sort it, we want to give people the ability to respond to errors within GitLab. And so creating issues from the Sentry detail page is the next thing we're working on in 12.6. So in case anybody is not familiar with what that is, we have this beautiful new detail page that's releasing in 12.5, and we're going to add the ability to create new issues for it. Amelia, did I miss anything on that? It's just going to look the same as the error detail page, just in issue form.
I think this is the new issue that you will create. The button that we're adding is on one of the other PNGs.
Oh yes, that was confusing.
But it's up.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
That was my bad. So this is where you create it, and then it'll look like an issue.
But
Cool.
Stack traces aren't going to show up in the issue for this first iteration, right?
That's not my understanding. My understanding is that stack traces will. Shall we clarify?
I don't think that's what the description says.
It does. Stack traces are included in here, and we talk about how to show the first 10 lines and then expand it to more and show less. Stack trace is part of the scope of this issue.
Okay, I'll have to relabel then.
And is that presumably easier because we are doing stack traces in the error details now?
I really think that should be broken up to separate issue because the title is misleading. So I'll create a separate issue to track that.
How is the title misleading?
The title means I can create an issue from this entry error detail page, which means when you click the create issue, then it'll show up some Sentry information, which is what the proposal said. So I was looking at the proposal, not the design. But I think we should break this up because this is a little bit too large for an issue, in my opinion.
I agree here. Yeah.
You agree, Vitaly?
Yeah, because with displaying stack trace, it looks like a separate feature, and we can use it everywhere.
But we discussed it before, and we already have the stack trace component, so we decided that we can reuse it here as long as we get the same format of the response from the backend side. But
yeah, I'm not saying we can't do it this release. I'm just saying for tracking the work here, it would be better to track them as two separate issues because it seems like two separate concepts.
So did I
I
understand
think
it
it's
right?
Yeah, Vitaly, go for it.
Can we now display in any issue the similar stack trace? Because issue detail is just markdown. Can we paste this chunk of markdown anywhere and we will see the similar stack trace? Or
So
no.
this is shipping in 12.5.
For example, redact them in the platform, and then I'll also send a white.
Maybe if it works now, so maybe we can do it together.
We are releasing the ability, it's going to be in the error detail page. So I don't have easy access to designs of that. It looks like this. The error detail page looks like this. And so this issue is just copying what the error detail page looks like into an issue. And since we already figured out how to do the stack trace, that was why it's part of the scope. I am not against creating another issue, but it seemed easy to keep it together.
Because I didn't know we can use this stack trace thingy already. So if you can, yeah, it's simple. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so the case for having it separate also is because you can easily create a new issue by just passing in contents to URL, and then it wouldn't require backend. But then if we're trying to pull the stack trace into an issue, then it's going to require backend work.
Okay.
So hence having two separate issues is easier to track.
More than happy to do that. There is a not trivial amount of work required to rescope this, to remove all mention of the stack trace, remove the designs from
I'm happy to do that.
Great. Okay, I'll let you do that and then create another issue for adding the stack trace. Okay, awesome.
Sorry, just to make sure I understand, have we talked to its plan, right, that manages like all the components on this page? Because if we're adding the stack trace, we're now playing with like the component order here, right? Because it's not going to be a part of the issue description if we're using that component.
Elena, I don't know the answer to that.
Like my original idea was that like backend would provide some kind of containers the way we usually do it. And like frontend will detect it and insert the stack trace like frontend component if like the response from backend does have stack trace. But I'm not sure about the ownership of the page and like other stuff.
The way I'm imagining it is just that we were adding it as part of the issue description rather than adding a separate component. But maybe I'm not understanding something, like some of the technical way that we're building the stack trace.
We could potentially do it that way. That's just more GFM stuff, which is fine, but kind of a hassle. But yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I do think we should collaborate with that plan team to make sure that we're all aligned there, because like there's potential chance of collision.
Clement, do you mind if you're going to create this issue, right? Do you mind capturing that thought? Thank you.
I will do that, and I'll reach out to that team.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome, thanks guys. Okay. This one is simple. This is just adding metrics for seeing how many people actually create issues on Sentry errors. And I had a question on this one because I originally wrote it so that we want to count the number of issues created from the Sentry error detail page. But there's a feature in Sentry where you can create a GitLab issue from Sentry for an error. And to me, the motivation in either scenario is the same. So I think that we should probably count both and add those together to get an understanding of how many issues people are creating for Sentry errors regardless of where they create it from. Is it possible to know if an issue was created from Sentry? And if we don't know, that can be part of this investigation. Did that make sense?
That makes sense. I don't know the answer to whether it's possible. I can't.
That's okay.
I can't think of any way, but I also don't know everything about it.
If we have, sorry, if we have a field somewhere in database in issue like source, so if we track how we create this issue, for example, by providing source from Sentry, then we can just count the number of issues in the database. But I don't know if we do this. Just an idea.
Awesome. Thanks,
Couldn't
Billy.
you track this using Snowplow on the front end?
We could do that for the ones created from our UI, but not from Sentry's.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm not convinced we check for source.
And that's okay.
Maybe we can start doing this. Because if you want to do it from a front end, we need to store this number of issues somewhere separately.
And we'll make that part of the, thank you, Vitaly. We'll make that part of the investigation of this. And if it's not possible to know, I can assess how difficult it is to start tracking that. I'd love to get a sense of, you know, if everyone's doing it from Sentry and not from GitLab, or if people are barely using the feature from Sentry, to the extent that we have information on that. Okay.
Can we just make that 2 bullet points for the usage ping then? Because we don't actually want the sum, right? We want both individually. If we want to know where stuff's coming from.
Yes, that is exactly what I just said. So thank you for clarifying what I wrote. Okay. Thanks, guys. Okay, moving right along. Sorting. So some information that I think we get through the API for an error that Sentry provides is timestamp when something was first seen, when something was last seen, and then how frequently said event is occurring. And we want to give people the ability to sort a table by that information, as those are details that someone might prioritize errors on. So they're going to check out the ones that are happening the most frequently, or the ones that happened most recently. And so that's going to look like this. Does anybody have any questions on that? No?
Do we get this?
Yeah.
I have a question. Do we get this
Sure.
data for the list API? I'm sure that we have this first seen, last seen for the separate error object, but not sure about the list of errors. Is it clear?
I don't know if I understand the question. If I think that we get first seen, last seen, and then frequency for each error that comes back.
Yeah, I started to look at this issue, and yeah, we do get those things.
Okay.
But you can't sort via the API, the Sentry API, so we'll have to do it on our end.
Yeah, just wanted to make
yeah.
sure that the list will return this data, that we don't get this data in separate like error objects, but like the.
Oh, I understand. Now I get it. Sorry, Elena. Okay, I think
Okay.
it comes all together. And then Allison, do you have any concerns about, I mean, we can't control this, but having to do it on our side?
Not without pagination, but once we add in pagination, it might be kind of harder because then you'll have to basically sort the whole list of all the pages first, and then.
Are there, Allison, do you know, in looking into it, are there other ways we can sort the list? Because yeah, if we can't do it with pagination, then it's going to be not useful.
It will not work with pagination. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure yet.
Okay. That might be, if you don't mind looking into that and commenting on this issue, if there are other ways we can sort it that would be useful, that might be a good thing to look into.
Okay.
And I believe we were working on pagination this milestone. Is that gonna roll over into 12.5? If so, I just want to add it to the planning, or I'm sorry, 12.6. If so, I just want to add it to the planning issue.
It can go to 12.6, but not 12.5.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Fiddly. Do you mind if you have a second grabbing that issue and putting it in the meeting agenda, and then I can put it in the planning issue for us?
Could you say it again?
Yeah. Do you have access to the issue for the pagination work?
I can send it to you.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thanks, Laura.
Sorry.
And then that's okay. There's a lot of issues. Is that a blocker? That seems like a blocker for this one.
Yeah, it may end up being a blocker.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. Next one. Okay. Kindly created by Elena as an excellent follow-up, but we're going to add syntax highlighting for the code that appears in the Sentry stack trace to mirror the design of error code blocks that we show within GitLab. Did you want to add anything else to this, Elena?
No, actually, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Awesome. Pretty simple. Whole purpose of this is to assist users in quick visual consumption. That's how they're used to looking at code. We should mirror that in the stack trace as pretty much all other tools that show code blocks do. Okay. All right. So this one, we just had an excellent conversation with Dennis Tang, an engineering manager on the manage team, about how the integration between GitLab and Sentry works. So there's still going to be a little bit of investigation that may affect this issue. But essentially, on the new error detail page, we want to be linking the suspect commit from which this error originated.
I have a question here in like the scope, like in the light of our previous conversation.
Yes.
Like, do we want to link to the commit in GitLab as far as I understand, because Sentry also has this commit page or something. Is it right?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think this is where we had a couple of miscommunications. My understanding is that we want to link to the GitLab commit, as GitLab is where we are going to fix the problem. So we want to keep people in GitLab. And if you have access to the GitLab commit, you have access to the individual who created that commit, the merge request that it was part of, when it was pushed to production. Amelia, was that your understanding of this as well?
Yeah, surfacing the GitLab information so that they can troubleshoot within GitLab would be the aim.
Yes. And Elena, back to your question about our conversation we just had with Dennis. We are going to pause on linking to, not pause, we're going to have another issue where we add the Sentry release information to the error. That will be a different issue. The scope of this one will be to link to the suspect commit from which the error originated in GitLab. Does that make sense to everybody?
It does.
Okay.
Maybe
awesome.
it were said in that we need to link to GitLab, but not to Sentry, because my original understanding was that we link to Sentry, not GitLab.
And that is entirely my fault that I have not been clarifying, as there are commit and release and error pages in GitLab and in Sentry. And so when I'm describing those, I have to put GitLab or Sentry in front of them. So I will do that on all issues moving forward. I'm so sorry for the confusion. Okay. So this particular one, we are working to get access to a test instance of Sentry that Dennis has set up so that we can test this, as the current GitLab Sentry instance is about 18 months behind and on a really old version. So it's not using any of the new suspect commit functionality that Sentry's created, and we want to be able to use that. All right, any questions? Perfect. Okay, so in 12.5, we're going to have a brand new error detail page. In 12.6, we're working on the ability to create an issue from that page so that all of the error details, potentially the stack trace, appear in that issue. The scope of this issue is to link that back to the error detail page. So if Elena has been triaging errors, she finds a critical one, she creates an issue for it, and I'm doing the same, I'm not creating duplicate issues. I have context to, look, there's already a GitLab issue open to fix this. So we want to add that information to the error detail page in an obvious way so that people can see that and not duplicate work. Any questions on that? Awesome. Okay. Next. There's been a lot of questions, and I've been asking a lot of team members to try and help me figure out how we can associate Sentry errors with GitLab commits, releases, and merge requests. And so I wanted to create a spike issue to capture that work. And for, if we wanted to assign this to somebody for doing that research, but it's here to capture the research necessary to figure out how to do this. I've linked to 4 issues for 12.7 that this will inform. Anybody have any questions on this? Actually, I'm going to clarify something here. When I say release, originally I meant GitLab release. We had a conversation this morning that uncovered that it might be more useful to be linking to the Sentry release page in Sentry. So when we're saying release, I need to be really careful to say GitLab release or Sentry release, and we still need to figure out which one or both is most useful to people. Does anybody have any questions around that? Up until this moment, I've been confusing everyone, so I'm trying to be clear now. Everybody's totally on the same page, it seems like. So I'm going to add to this.
I mean, I would say that to me, the difference between those two things is confusing, but I also haven't looked into this, so that's not surprising.
It's also confusing to me, Seth, so we can talk about that real fast. A Sentry detects if there's a new release or not. I don't know how that happens. That is part of the spike. We have a feature in GitLab called release. We don't dog food this as heavily as I think we could. So originally when we were planning a scope of work, my thought was, let's correlate a Sentry error to a GitLab commit, a GitLab merge request, and a GitLab release. Well, we obviously use commits and we obviously use merge requests very heavily. We are not using the release feature as much based on some conversations I've had so far. Sentry releases in Sentry show you a page of all of the commits that are part of that release and errors associated with that release. So while it's not the GitLab release, they are one-to-one, and the UI in Sentry is very helpful for digging through all of the errors that were introduced with a new release. So since we don't have that particular functionality in GitLab, we want to link to the Sentry release. If that makes sense, it's confusing.
When you say that we're not using the release feature, do you mean at GitLab in general or on this team?
Some projects are using it. So let's look at one that is using
So
it.
like an example is we don't use it on the handbook page because we don't do tags. And for GitLab, the project, we don't use it because we don't bundle it by itself. We bundle it with Omnibus. So those are some different examples. But for GitLab UI as a microservice, we do use it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we did this for GitLab as well, since that's more microservice.
Thanks.
Is that helpful for everybody? So this is the GitLab releases page for this particular repository. And
Yeah,
when I say, yeah, really?
I'm looking at this Sentry releases page, and it seems to me it's part of SDK. So it's user decide if they want to send this additional data.
Also, we should be careful what we show on here, since we're going to show this on the recording.
Okay.
The Sentry page.
Let me send a link to documentation. It's so if I'm a customer and I have my project which uses Sentry, and if I don't send this information to Sentry, we have no way to get this. If I understand it right, I'm not sure. I just made a quick look.
Vitaly, you bring up a really good point. So I talked to Dennis this morning, who's managing the upgrade of Sentry, and I said exactly this to him. I said, I went on the Sentry documentation, I read about releases, it looks like a really manual process. Before you deploy, you have to go in Sentry, create a release, and then tell Sentry all of the commits that release is going to contain. And then after you deploy, you have to tell it again that you released it. And Dennis said, if our integration is upgraded and we're fully integrated with Sentry, we shouldn't have to do this. It should happen automatically. I don't have any other details, but once we've upgraded, we, the team, will be able to see how this works better. Billy, would you be interested in chatting with Dennis about this? I think that you have a lot more knowledge and context in this domain, would be able to ask better questions.
Yeah, I can try. If we set up Sentry for our customers, we probably can automate this information. And I believe even if someone installs Sentry by themselves, they can automate this process, but this should be done by someone. I
So
can.
we have,
yeah.
That's a great idea. And we do have an issue open for automatically telling Sentry when you release to automate this for our customers. So perhaps we want to spike in 12.5 and what that might look like, or we can have the spike in 12.7 after Dennis has fixed our Sentry instance for GitLab. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe we should give it more time to figure out how to do this, right?
Perfect. Okay, that's great. I'll just keep in touch with Dennis, see when we get our version of Sentry upgraded so that we can have a more informed conversation with him, and then we can chat about how we can automate this. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to add more detail to this spike to be really clear on the purpose and what we're trying to do, as I think it's a bit sparse. But this is the spike for 12.6. Okay, moving right along. The next few of these are confidential issues. So I don't know if I want to show them on this public recording. So this is all monitor related app limits work. These were created. We've got a backlog of them for the monitor stage. We're sharing these with the APM side of the house. And they're essentially to protect ourselves from someone utilizing unbounded features. Anybody want to add anything to those? Feel free to click into these. I just don't want to show them on the recording. Perfect. And then this one that keeps coming back. So we're going to fix it. Is everyone familiar with this issue? We've now got a fairly extensive discussion on it. Sean is digging in to implementation. I most recently asked him yesterday if this was still happening. If it's not still happening, I don't want to work on it because it does not, the scope is not known. This seems like a proverbial rabbit hole waiting to happen. And I don't like committing to work on rabbit holes. But if it's blocking people and it's preventing people from testing features or doing their job, we need to fix it. Okay.
So I still have never had this happen to me.
Okay.
It's probably worth finding out individually.
Laura, is this still happening to you?
No, it hasn't happened in like months.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I think it hasn't happened to anybody for a while on this team, and we tried to close it at some point, and then as soon as we closed it, then somebody else chimed in and was like, well, wait, this is still a problem for us. So, I mean, if we're not seeing this anymore, we could try to close this again. But I guess let's let Sean look into it a little further to determine that.
Let's see.
If we scroll to the bottom, Sean had a proposal for how much time he was going to spend on it. Or at least that was yesterday. So like he said he was going to spend like 7 hours on it. So that seems pretty reasonable to time box it.
Yep, that seems good.
There is a workaround. Okay. I'm happy with his proposal if we can make it just a little bit easier and then
Okay.
kick the can down the road.
Cool.
Okay. All right. From the design discovery side of the house, Amelia, Nadia, and I are going to be pushing forward on, we just finished a huge round of solution validation research with talking to more people about their error tracking workflows, getting feedback on designs. It's actually really cool. We're one of the teams pioneering this new product development workflow. So the fact that we're able to do some usability testing and interviews was so helpful in planning 12.7. And so the things that we're working on validating and designing for are trying to add more links to merge requests and releases that we've talked about before. So that's going to be on the error detail page. Adding more information to the error detail page. The language, the framework, priority, or urgency are potentially things that will get back via the API. We're not saying that they are, but we're trying to look at all of the information, all of the tags that errors have, and give people as much pertinent information in GitLab as possible. And then this is something else. This is a new action that emerged from research that people really enjoy having to be able to do to errors. So the ability to ignore an error. And this came from people who are using rollbar, from people who are using error break. This is not deletion. This is not closing. This is, errors are noisy and plentiful. And so I want to be able to refine my view by ignoring something and removing it from that view. Will still exist in Sentry. And the MVC of this will likely be remove a single instance of an error. So if it happens again, it'll come back. And that could be a good indication to an individual that they need to fix that thing. We're still working on what this might look like. But this is another item we're doing discovery for.
Oh, I just noticed too, are we gonna, originally there was filtering issues in 12.7. Are we still thinking about doing filtering the list?
Oh, yes, they're not linked here. I'll just go to the board. So here's 12.7. Here we go. Thank you for calling that out, Amelia. We want to add different sorts of filtering to the error list within GitLab as well. And so the ideas that we are playing with right now are by environment, release, merge request, and then this notion of username or user ID. We have not fleshed those out. So when we have more information, we'll talk about those in the team meetings as we move through 12.6. And I will link those in the 12.6 planning issue. Thank you for highlighting that for documentation and transparency. All right. Does anybody have any questions on the scope? This has been a challenging project. I'm really impressed with our progress. We've got a lot of stuff coming up in 12.6 and a good amount of unknowns. So as you uncover unknowns, just communicate early and often. And we can work to unblock you.